The wild stallion reared against the storm, its hooves striking the air as Jake Morrison gripped the fence with white knuckles, his prosthetic leg planted firm in the mud. "He's never been broken!" Elena shouted over the thunder, watching her husband work his magic with the untamable beast. But as the horse's eyes locked with Jake's, something impossible happened. The stallion lowered its head in submission, and Elena realized the broken cowboy she'd married had just conquered the one horse that had killed 3 men trying to tame it. The stagecoach wheels carved deep ruts through the Texas dust as Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the grimy window. Watching Dust Creek emerge from the heat shimmered like a mirage that might dissolve at any moment. At 24, she had traveled further from home than any woman in her family ever had, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and the faded daguerreotype of Thomas Hartwell tucked against her heart. His carefully penned letters had promised her a ranch house with yellow curtains and a garden where she could grow the tomatoes her grandmother had taught her to tend. The coach lurched to a stop outside the general store, and Elena's stomach twisted with the same nervous energy that had plagued her since leaving San Antonio. She smoothed her best dress, the blue cotton one with tiny pearl buttons that had belonged to her sister, and stepped down into the dusty street. The town stretched before her like a collection of weathered bones bleaching in the sun. "You the Mexican girl, come for old Thomas?" The store clerk barely looked up from his ledger, his voice carrying the flat indifference of a man delivering bad news he'd already forgotten. Elena's English felt clumsy on her tongue as she nodded, suddenly aware of how her accent marked her as foreign in this place that was supposed to become home. "Thomas Hartwell died 2 weeks back. Pneumonia took him fast." The clerk's pencil scratched against the paper, each stroke driving the reality deeper into Elena's chest. "Doc says he was asking for you right up till the end, though." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena's knees threatened to buckle as she gripped the counter, the rough wood solid beneath her palms while everything else seemed to shift and blur. 2 weeks. She had been traveling toward a dead man for 2 weeks, imagining their first meeting, practicing the English phrases she would use to thank him for his kindness. "What am I supposed to do now?" The question escaped before she could stop it, sounding small and lost in the cramped store. The clerk shrugged, finally looking up with eyes that held more curiosity than compassion. "Reckon that's your problem to solve, miss. Town don't have much use for strays." Elena walked outside on unsteady legs, the afternoon sun brutal against her face. The few people on the street stared openly, their whispered conversations following her like shadows. She had exactly $3.47 sewn into her dress hem, enough for maybe a week of meals if she was careful, not nearly enough for passage back to San Antonio. From the saloon across the street, Jake Morrison watched the young woman's world collapse through the dust-streaked window. At 31, he had become an expert at recognizing the exact moment when someone realized they had nowhere left to run. He shifted his weight against the bar, feeling the familiar ache where his leg ended and the wooden prosthetic began, a constant reminder of his own spectacular fall from grace. 3 years ago, Jake Morrison had been a name that meant something in Texas. Bull riding championships hung on his cabin wall, like monuments to a man who no longer existed. Now he limped through town, while conversation stopped mid-sentence, watching people's eyes flick to his leg before sliding away in embarrassment or pity. The Mexican girl stood in the street looking exactly like he had felt the day they told him his rodeo days were over, lost, broken, carrying the weight of dreams that would never come true. Jake finished his whiskey and made a decision that probably ranked among the stupider ones of his life. He pushed away from the bar, his prosthetic leg thumping against the floorboards as he crossed to the Batwing doors. The girl needed help, and God knew he understood what it felt like to be unwanted in a place that used to welcome you. "Miss," he called out, stepping into the blazing afternoon heat. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" Elena's hands trembled as she looked up at the stranger who had spoken to her. Jake Morrison stood in the afternoon shadows, his weathered face showing more kindness than anyone else in this dusty town had offered. She noticed how he leaned slightly to one side, how his left leg seemed different somehow, but desperation made her push those observations aside. "No, sir, I don't," she admitted, her accent thick with exhaustion and fear. "The man I came to marry, he's—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Saying the words aloud would make Thomas Hartwell's death feel final. Jake nodded, understanding filling his dark eyes. I heard about Thomas. Good man. Had a cabin ready for you and everything. He shifted his weight, the movement awkward but practiced. Name's Jake Morrison. I got a spare room if you need somewhere to think through your options. The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Elena knew she should be cautious about accepting help from a strange man, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the angels God sends us don't look like what we expect, mija. I can pay something, Elena said quickly, though they both knew her few dollars wouldn't stretch far. And I can cook, clean, help with whatever work you have. Jake almost smiled at that. Work. If only she knew how little of that he had these days. We'll figure something out. Town's not much for hospitality toward. Folks they don't know, especially... He gestured vaguely toward her, and Elena understood. Especially Mexican women with nowhere to go. His cabin sat at the edge of town, small and sturdy with a front porch that had seen better days. Elena followed Jake inside, noticing how he moved with careful deliberation. Each step planned and executed with precision. The front room was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace and two mismatched chairs that looked like they'd been built for comfort rather than appearance. Room's back there, Jake said, pointing down a short hallway. Nothing fancy, but it's got a real bed and a window that opens. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Should probably tell you up front, folks in town already think poorly of me. Having you here won't improve their opinion of either of us. Elena set her satchel down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter this unexpected kindness. Why do they think poorly of you? Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his left leg extending stiffly in front of him. Used to be somebody around here, bull rider, had championships, prize money, respect. He tapped his leg, and Elena heard the hollow sound of wood against wood. Bull named Tornado decided that was enough of that. The prosthetic leg explained his careful movements, the way he positioned himself, the slight grimace that crossed his features when he thought no one was looking. Elena had grown up around working men who carried their injuries like battle scars, but Jake's disability seemed to weigh on him differently, like a constant reminder of lost possibilities. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. Don't need sorry, just need folks to mind their own business, which they're not inclined to do. Jake looked out the window toward town. Point is, you staying here gives them more to talk about. Might make things harder for you. Elena thought about the store clerk's indifference, the stares from strangers, the reality of being completely alone in a place that clearly didn't want her. Harder than sleeping in the street with $3 to my name? That evening, Elena prepared a simple meal from the meager supplies in Jake's pantry, stretching beans and cornmeal into something that resembled the comfort food her mother used to make. Jake watched her work with quiet appreciation, unused to having another person's presence fill the silence of his cabin. You cook like someone who's fed hungry people before, he observed. 7 brothers, Elena replied, stirring the pot. My mother said if I could satisfy them, I could feed anyone. The memory brought a small smile to her face, the first genuine expression of joy Jake had seen from her. They ate in comfortable quiet as darkness settled over Dust Creek. Jake found himself stealing glances at his unexpected house guest, noting how she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, how her eyes missed nothing even when she seemed focused on her food. Thomas wrote that he had horses, Elena said eventually. What happened to them? Sold most of them to pay for his medicine. Doc tried everything, but pneumonia's got its own schedule. Jake pushed food around his plate. He kept talking about you toward the end, said you grew up around horses. Elena nodded. My uncle had a small ranch outside Monterey. I helped him train the young ones, breed the mares. He taught me that horses remember kindness longer than they remember fear. Something in her voice made Jake look up sharply. There was knowledge there, real understanding of animals and their nature. Most folks around here believe in breaking horses, not training them. Most folks are wrong about a lot of things, Elena said quietly. After dinner, Jake excused himself and stepped out onto the back porch. Moving with that careful precision, Elena was beginning to recognize. Curiosity drew her to the kitchen window, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Behind the cabin, Jake had built a series of makeshift corrals from salvaged lumber and rope. 3 horses moved in the largest enclosure, their coats gleaming in the moonlight. But it was Jake himself who captured Elena's attention. The man who limped through town with his head down had transformed into something entirely different. He stood in the center of the corral, perfectly still, as a young bay mare approached him with cautious steps. His prosthetic leg, which seemed like such a burden inside the house, became an anchor point, keeping him steady and calm as the horse investigated this strange, patient human who made no sudden movements or demanding gestures. Elena watched Jake extend his hand slowly, palm up, letting the mare catch his scent and decide for herself whether to trust him. When she finally allowed him to touch her neck, Elena saw Jake's face change completely. The bitterness and self-doubt melted away, replaced by something that could only be described as magic. This was what Jake Morrison had become after losing everything else. Not broken, as the town believed, but transformed. His disability had forced him to develop patience and intuition that no able-bodied cowboy could match. Unable to use brute strength or quick reflexes, he had learned to communicate with horses through pure understanding. Elena realized she was witnessing something revolutionary. Jake wasn't just training horses, he was speaking their language, earning their trust through methods that went against everything traditional cowboys believed. His accident hadn't ended his career with animals. It had given birth to something entirely new. As if sensing her presence, Jake looked toward the house and saw Elena's silhouette in the window. For a moment, embarrassment flickered across his features, as if he'd been caught revealing his deepest secret. Then Elena raised her hand in a small wave, and something passed between them that felt like recognition. Two broken people had found each other in Dust Creek, Texas. Neither knew yet what they might build together, but watching Jake work with the horses, Elena felt the first stirring of hope she'd experienced since learning of Thomas Hartwell's death. The bay mare nuzzled Jake's shoulder, completely at ease with the gentle man who had shown her that not all humans meant harm. Elena smiled, understanding that tomorrow would bring new possibilities neither of them had imagined when this day began. The impossible had happened, and Jake Morrison stood in the churning mud, feeling like he could breathe again for the first time in 3 years. The killer stallion stood before him, with its massive head lowered in submission, rain streaming down its black coat as thunder rolled across the Texas sky. Every person in Dust Creek had gathered to watch him fail, and instead they had witnessed something that would be talked about for generations. Elena rushed to his side, her dress soaked through and her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes blazed with fierce pride. "You did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Jake, you actually did it." The stallion that had killed 3 men stood calm as a house cat, while Jake ran his hands along its powerful neck. Bishop's face had gone white as fresh cotton, his mouth hanging open like a man watching water flow uphill. The crowd murmured and pointed, their whispers carrying a new tone Jake hadn't heard directed at him since before his accident. "Guess that settles it," Jake called out to Bishop, his voice carrying across the muddy yard. "Horses trained. That makes our deal complete." Bishop fumbled for words, his schemes crumbling like a house built on sand. The bank manager, who had come to witness Jake's failure, now stared at the trained stallion with calculating eyes, suddenly very interested in extending that mortgage after all. Money had a way of changing people's attitudes faster than lightning. Word spread through Texas like wildfire in August grass. The crippled cowboy who could gentle killer horses became legend before summer turned to fall. Ranchers traveled 3 days by wagon just to watch Jake work, bringing their most troubled animals and paying prices that made Elena's business sense sing with satisfaction. Jake no longer hid his prosthetic leg or hunched his shoulders when walking through town. The wooden limb that had once marked him as broken now stood as proof that strength came in forms most people never considered. Young cowboys started showing up at his corrals, eager to learn methods that worked through patience instead of force. Elena proved herself a natural at managing their growing enterprise. She kept the books, negotiated contracts, and scheduled training sessions with the sharp efficiency of someone born to business. Her accent, which had once marked her as an outsider, now carried the authority of success that made even the most stubborn ranchers listen carefully to her words. The spare room in Jake's cabin became their office, then their planning room, and finally the place where they spread out drawings of the house Elena designed with her careful architect's eye. Large enough for the family they were planning, with windows facing the corrals where their children would grow up, understanding that kindness worked better than cruelty. Their wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with half of Texas in attendance. The same town that had shunned them both now claimed them as local heroes, conveniently forgetting their previous attitudes. Elena wore her grandmother's lace mantilla, and Jake stood straight and proud, without caring who noticed his prosthetic leg. 6 months after their desperate gamble with the killer stallion, the Morrison Horse Ranch had become the most respected training facility in 3 states. Jake's revolutionary methods were being studied and copied by cowboys from Oklahoma to Mexico, though few could match his intuitive understanding of horse psychology. Elena negotiated with a buyer from Kansas while Jake worked with a young bay colt in the main corral, teaching a nervous cowboy from Austin that whispering worked better than shouting. The man who had once hidden at the edge of town now commanded respect from anyone who worked with animals for a living. The broken people had indeed created something magnificent. Not just a successful business, but proof that strength, patience, and partnership could overcome any obstacle life threw at them. Jake Morrison and Elena Vasquez had turned their shattered dreams into something better than either had dared imagine alone. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Morrison Ranch as Jake watched his newest student fumble with the lead rope, sweat beading on the young man's forehead despite the cool autumn air. The apprentice cowboy from San Antonio had traveled 200 miles to learn Jake's methods, joining a waiting list that stretched 3 months into the future. "Easy now," Jake called out, his prosthetic leg firmly planted in the packed earth. "That mare's testing your patience, not your strength." The horse in question, a spirited chestnut with trust issues, had been dropped off by a frustrated rancher who'd nearly given up hope. Elena emerged from their new house, the one with yellow curtains she'd dreamed about during those first terrifying days in Dust Creek. Her business ledger tucked under one arm, she wore the satisfied expression of someone who'd just negotiated another profitable contract. Their waiting list had grown so long that she'd started charging consultation fees just for Jake to evaluate problem horses. "The railroad man from Denver wants to discuss shipping rates," she announced, settling beside Jake on the porch they had built together. "Says he can get our students here faster if we're willing to guarantee 20 trainees per month." Jake chuckled, remembering when they had been grateful for a single paying customer. "Tell him we'll think about it. Don't want to turn this into some factory where horses become numbers instead of individuals." The transformation of their lives still amazed him sometimes. The cabin that had once felt like a prison now anchored a thriving operation spanning 40 acres. Their marriage had produced not just love, but a partnership that challenged every assumption Dust Creek had held about broken people and second chances. Conrad Bishop rode past their gate most mornings now, his face carefully neutral as he surveyed the success that should have been his downfall. The bank had not only extended their mortgage, but offered to finance expansion. Amazing how attitudes shifted when money was involved. Elena placed her hand over her still flat stomach, sharing the secret they had decided to announce after Sunday church. Their child would grow up understanding that strength came in many forms, that disabilities could become advantages, and that patience always triumphed over force. Jake Morrison had learned to stand tall again, not despite his prosthetic leg, but because of everything it had taught him about resilience. The broken cowboy and the stranded bride had built something magnificent from the wreckage of their shattered plans, proving that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never intended to reach.